Well, the most important thing I can tell you is that I was born and raised in India. Time I was growing up, it was still pre-industrial. The power was handmade, hand-drawn, hand-embroidered, hand-carved, or by animals. Animals still pulled the plows through wheels. Women still pulled water out of the wells with ropes by their own body power. It was a wonderful, amazing, much, much slower life scene than we know about now. And when I first came to America to go to college, people hardly knew what India meant. Both my parents were medical missionaries, and my dad, Herschel Aldrich, was born and raised in India himself in the early 1900s, 1902. And his wisdom, I suppose at least some of it, came from ancient India, because it was old India when I was a kid. Their wisdom is just so deep and so wise, and all of this before India gained her independence in 1947. So I was really lucky to be there when there were still many wise people, and I say wise, but they were not educated in the formal sense that a Westerner would call educated, but they knew things. They knew about the weather, they knew about loving, kind behavior. They knew to use nature and natural sounds and what they saw and what they heard and what they smelled and what they tasted and what they touched. And most importantly of all, what they felt. I had left a country that was so colorful, so literally colorful, and so full of life and so full of smells and so full of sounds and light. So I came to America in 1950, and I looked and felt like an immigrant off the boat. We actually came by ship. It was a 30-day trip. It felt terrible to be misread as a know-nothing. But it's true, I knew nothing about American ways, even though my parents were American. But my hometown was in India, and my first language was Indian. So how do you put all that into one pot? It took me really until my present age to make sense of it, to put it all together. So, of course, I did plenty of searching. I was first a sociology major, and because nursing school became a potential way to save money, I went to nursing school and earned a Bachelor of Science in nursing. And I worked briefly in a mental health unit of a university hospital. I loved it. I loved working with people who were different than the normal, and in the medical way, it was considered off the rails. So they were popped into this unit that was in a psychiatric hospital. I always thought that was extremely peculiar because I really liked those people. And I'd raised 3 children, and at the end of that period, which was a 15-year period, I was looking for something else because nursing in a standard way didn't really appeal to me so much. So I started working with art, experimenting, putting things together, discovering. And that led to writing a book about flower arranging. That was the first art form. And it led to doll making and off-loom fiber art, which I hung on the wall. And I marketed it. I never got rich, but I made things that people really seemed to love. So I was still exploring. I was still discovering. And I called my workshops that I gave self-discovery through art. And my intuition did a really good job because I looked back on it and I realized, yes, you have to discover for yourself, not just what kind of art you like, but what kind of life you want to live. There, as a little girl, until I was 8, I used to walk with my ayah, which you would know as an amma, or caregiver. And her name was Ba, which means mother. And she was more of a mother than my own mom because my mom worked as a lab tech in the same hospital as my dad. So I was nurtured in the formative years by Indians. I spoke Gujarati. My playmates were Gujarati. Of course, I spoke English with my parents, so I was bilingual. And then when I started to go to school at age 8, we took the train up to the mountains, and it was a 2-day and 3-night trip. So that the trip itself was also educational. Everything we did was new, it was exciting, it was wonderful, it was so mysterious, and in lots of ways it was weird. It took me the whole rest of my life, including a trip back to India in 1984, when I interviewed people who were Hindu and Muslim and Jain and Parsi, which is Zoroastrian. I wanted to know, what were these practices? What were they doing? What did they mean? And I had wonderful, wonderful conversations with everyone, and they were so generous. One man said to me, "Well, you don't act like a tourist at all." I said, "Well, I'm not a tourist. I grew up in India. And I speak Hindi and I speak Gujarati, 2 Indian languages, and some of the words I was quite familiar with." So that caught my attention. But mostly I loved the way that I felt when they talked about having a different point of view, about seeing things differently, about understanding things differently. And because I had been turned off by not so much the medical terminology, but medical perspective, that we were entities that needed fixing or curing or adjusting, something in me knew that wasn't true, not true for me. Something, even in college years, I knew drew me. It drew me to places I needed to be. My parents were still in India, and I was very, very lonely. But I knew during my summer breaks, when everybody else went home, I couldn't go home because India was too far away. So I always chose something that I thought would be fun to be in, that would be in fresh air. And so I worked in places that were really fun to be in. I worked at a dude ranch 2 years in a row. I worked at a summer camp. So I'm born and brewed and baked and maybe overbaked, but I'm still here. I wanted to know the meaning of all those things that I saw, all the things that I saw, that I heard and smelled and tasted and sensed. Oh my goodness, if there's ever a sensory place, that's it. You know, you sense that someone has died because you see the smoke rising from the pyre that they have been immolated on. They're burning. One of the traditions that I love so much about India is those leaf boats that are put into the sacred rivers every single evening by a devout Hindu.